Thanks everybody for being here. I think one of our major goals was really just to get folks in the room to meet each other, because we don't even know what's going on in our own community sometimes. I think from Access Humboldt's point of view, I just want to say that we're not really about radio initially, but we're about people having a voice, local voices through community media. And a lot of times we tag that with by any media necessary. And one of the things that we recognize in our community, radio is actually very vibrant. I mean, I have to sort of initially apologize to Patrick and his colleagues in the commercial radio space, because we made an intentional decision today to really invite non-commercial radio to get together and have this conversation. But we recognize that really community radio also includes, in communities like ours, there's a lot of locally owned and operated radio that's really local community radio. So thank you so much for coming, Patrick. And it was intentional in the sense of we thought it was important for us to first reach out and convene the non-commercial folks. But it was unintentional in the sense of Access Humboldt's point of view is, hey, if that's whatever gets your local voice heard is of value. And so we also will be reaching out and supporting the commercial media operators as well. And so it's kind of fun to see both pirate and low power, non-commercial, just within the non-commercial radio space. We have obviously a lot of diversity and really exciting dynamic in our community. Just the last sort of framing thing I want to say from Access Humboldt's point of view is we're looking at our work. We're a relatively new organization. We're just 4.5 years old. Please hang out a little bit and check out the media center that we've built here with Eureka City Schools and lots of other partners. We were created by local government. So we're not a broadcaster, so we don't have broadcast obligations that radio people know about. We're community access cable, which is actually a freer form of speech than radio or television, because we don't have broadcast license obligations. So there's interesting differences. Yeah, it's tricky for us because some of the things that we might want to simulcast with you, you can't simulcast. Sorry. Except maybe the pirate. I'm talking to the licensees here. Anyway, this really isn't to be about Access Humboldt, but I did want to explain to you what is our interest. So really our interest is what can we do to support everybody else's effort. We want to see all these different radio and other outlets succeed and thrive in our community. So part of that, and I'll just tell really quickly the story of how this day came about from my side, and then Sam picked up the vision and took it to what it is today. It started off with us reaching out to KMUD, having some preliminary interactions, the Grassroots Radio Coalition conference, for folks who know about that. Very exciting. They were the hosts of this national gathering of really leading edge community radio people, and this got us thinking, wow, maybe we ought to be doing a little more, and it tied in with our work about co-location of facilities. Access Humboldt's about building assets that are locally owned. So we have towers, we're developing tower sites, fiber networks, wireless networks for public education and government purposes. We see community radio as community anchor institutions that are big important nodes on our map. We want to build connections between stations and support those connections. So we started with this very close-up connection with KMUD, saying, okay, we visited you guys. You told us, you invited us to come, and Terry Clementson invited us, hey, come and participate in our community journalist training. We're always interested in doing outreach, and gee, if we could offer one up in Eureka, that would be really sweet. So we thought, okay, let's do that. And while we're at it, let's invite everybody else to come down. So kind of that's really the seed that sparked this whole thing. And I'll let Sam fill in the rest, but I just have to say, or a big chunk of it anyway, as he introduces our speaker, Humboldt is in a very special place in the sense of, and you all know this in terms of the communities that you're connected with, but this, in the national scene, there's this real big push for comprehensive communications infrastructure that is the same communications that's supporting local voices and arts and culture, can support public safety communications, can support government access, can support Wi-Fi at the library. It's not that big of a different thing to have free Wi-Fi at the library than it is to have a broadband connection at a community radio station that makes it possible for me to do my live show from home, right? I mean, that's all community infrastructure that's helping us communicate. And so in that sense, our goal here for Access Humboldt is to really fuel up everybody else who's doing it and figure out what's the best support we can offer. And so with that sort of setup, I want to introduce Sam Kaplan is working with us this year. He's with the Digital Arts Service Corps, which is an AmeriCorps program. So he's here for 1 year initially to work with us to inventory all the community media resources available in Humboldt County, the facilities, the equipment, the human resources, the training programs. So he's been doing a whole bunch of scoping around the whole county, and then he really pressed this idea that, you know, we've got this fantastic opportunity with radio. Why don't we make this thing bigger and better? So that's my setup. So thanks, Sam. Take it away.
So I don't have a huge background in radio. I was a DJ at my college station, but that's about it, in Haverford, Pennsylvania, WHRC, which is currently off the air. But after spending some time here, I came up here in August, and doing my visits to different community media assets around the county, I started to realize that in a lot of ways radio here is much more vibrant and more of an important community resource than television, partially because the cable system doesn't reach the whole county, and partially because people here have a pretty healthy distrust, I think, of whatever they see on their screens, you know, which I think is good, even if some of the stuff on the screens is good stuff, if it's coming from us or other people. And then, yeah, so with the recent passage of the Local Community Radio Act, it just really seemed like it was a good time to get people from different stations together and talk about community radio in Humboldt County and what kind of stuff we can do in the future. Gavin is a radio producer, independent journalist, and general advocate for the public interest who has been active in the radio and community media world since 2000. A graduate of Evergreen College, Gavin got his start at KVRX Austin, the University of Texas, and has since hosted programs or appeared live on KAOS 959 Austin, Boston Indie Media No DNC Radio, WSCA Portsmouth, KBCS Bellevue Seattle, KPTK Seattle, OCO Radio, Chaos Olympia, WUOG Athens, WBGU Bowling Green, Boise Community Radio, KSVR Mount Vernon, and KRFC Fort Collins. His writing has been published by Raw Story, Boise Weekly, The Austin American Statesman, and Radio Survivor, and republished by Common Dreams and Alternet, as well as Pat Buchanan's Twitter page. Yeah. And he can maybe tell you about that. It's a pretty interesting story. His advocacy work has also brought him to our nation's capital, where he has lobbied Congress. He's also testified before state legislative committees and confronted representatives from the FCC and the National Association of Broadcasters. Gavin is currently the Community Broadcast Coordinator at Common Frequency, which is a Davis-based nonprofit that works to support college and community radio, and a member of the Digital Arts Service Corps with me, which is a transmission project funded AmeriCorps program that places volunteers at public media and technology organizations around the country. His latest radio endeavor is a live local morning show featuring music and interviews with activists on Davis's KDRT LP called No Country for Young Men, which you can find online at kdrt.org.
So Common Frequency was founded in Davis, California about 5 years ago by a punk engineer named Todd Urich and other activists to provide support to innovative community and college radio projects. Our current projects include supplying research and policy commentary to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, working to change broadcast regulations around licensing of new FM translators and low-power FM licenses, aiding applicants in obtaining construction permits with mostly pro bono legal and engineering assistance, consulting on station governing, build-out, programming, legal compliance, outreach, community development as part of this capacity building service project funded by a transmission project that Sam mentioned. Also delivering on a grant agreement with the Media Democracy Fund, where we'll be conducting targeted outreach, coordinating FCC filings, and providing technical support to new LPFM applicants over the next 2 years. And we're at Common Frequency, we're going to be focused on access centers. in particular because Davis has successfully run DCTV and KDRT radio out of the same building now for many years. So we think that model can be really replicated around the country. And also we are facilitating the programmatic goals of the Radio for People Coalition, which includes Prometheus, Future Music Coalition, NFCB, and other friends. Right now we just do monthly conference calls, but we have kind of some long-term projects we're trying to develop. The other thing I do is I aggregate and distribute hundreds of links to news articles about radio and digital music. And I'll talk more about that. I have a bunch of links I wanted to encourage people to write down. So I was invited here to speak about the future of community radio. Now that Congress finally passed the Local Community Radio Act, which will create opportunities for hundreds of new local radio stations to jump onto the airwaves around the country, it's kind of exciting to think about what LPFM means. With the power of a light bulb, what you can do, 100 watts or less. You can make a lot of radio with the power of a light bulb. And I wrote up kind of 4 of the keywords that you probably are all familiar with in local radio, right? It's free, it's live, it's local, and it's information. It's amazing to me how hard it can be to get accurate information, considering all the tools we have. So I'm going to talk today about corporate media's slash and burn tactics as the rich get richer, the boom in public radio listening over the air and on the web, the biggest policy fights ahead in the new year, and also recap a couple of the most interesting moments I witnessed over the past year traveling the country to participate in community radio gatherings. So I'm embarking on my 11th year in radio. As a movement, we have some big 10th anniversaries to celebrate in 2011. There's a lot to celebrate right now. The LPFM bill basically took 10 years of grassroots organizing and lobbying in D.C. In addition to Prometheus and their campaign team, don't forget the fundamental work done by Senator Maria Cantwell's office. She and her staff, particularly a policy advisor there who works for her named Michael Dahm, never backed down on this local community radio bill, despite pressure from the National Broadcasting Lobby and unfortunately from NPR, who over time have really tried to stick up for the status quo. We can talk more about NPR. Also, Free Speech Radio News, the daily news show that airs on KMUD and all over the continent, avoided closure due to a budget crisis and is celebrating its 10th anniversary. DC's Best Advocates for Musicians and Indie Labels, the Future of Music Coalition, just turned 10 as well. And to me, there's never been a more fascinating time to communicate with other people via audio. Think about all the new gear we have at our disposal, and you realize the best radio content is still ahead of us in human history. Before we do a little Q&A in a while, I'll point out a couple of things I'm most excited about as a radio geek right now. I have some links up, like solar transmitters, free audio software, new revenue models for working musicians, and MP3 blogs, which radio needs to be thinking about. Don't get me wrong, a lot of things are screwed up in the music scene and in the radio industry too. You don't need me to tell you how difficult it is to find accurate and timely information about the world on a daily basis with a high-speed internet connection, and let alone without one. So just to give you a couple stats here that just kind of blew my mind. I was trying to do some research so I could actually back up some of my attitudes, you know? And according to the Project for Excellence in Journalism, over 14,000 journalists lost their jobs between 2001 and 2009 in the US. That means roughly 25% of the industry's news workforce disappeared over 9 years. I mean, the people are still here, right? A lot of us are in community media because there isn't a job for us in NPR or commercial media, although NPR is a great employer. We'll talk more about that. Also, minorities represented less than 9% of the radio workforce in 2009, despite making up over 34% of the population. As Laura Flanders said at the Grassroots Radio Conference in Garberville, there is a narrative that's missing. And the torment continues for the record industry, with sales down another 13% for 2010. Barnes & Noble's ripping out their music sections. Sony stopped making cassette Walkmans. And 2010 marked the end of the legendary Technics 1200 turntable, discontinued by Panasonic. Touring musicians and any of us who are informed concert goers were watching in shock as the Department of Justice approved the merger of the two largest promoters, Ticketmaster and Live Nation, into an even bigger monster. The negative impacts of rampant consolidation of broadcast ownership is more evident now than ever. And since the 1996 Telecommunications Act, signed into law by Bill Clinton, the radio business has been eating itself, and it has gotten very ill. Drowning under massive debt and desperate to cut more costs, Clear Channel laid off over 2,500 employees in 2009 alone. Program directors, morning show hosts, production pros, news anchors, One newspaper called it a bloodbath. The amount of money Clear Channel execs saved over the next year, $400 million. Guess what Rush Limbaugh's new 8-year contract was estimated at? $400 million. Ironic, don't you think? As writer Eric Bullard of Media Matters pointed out at the time, and this is in 2009, Clear Channel basically decided to give Limbaugh a 40% raise, which included writing a $100 million signing bonus check to celebrate his contract extension, which just that bonus check could have saved maybe 1,000 Clear Channel jobs for another year. Now, side note from the speech, I personally do not think that we need to take Rush Limbaugh off the air. I think that is crazy. This is the United States of America. He has a First Amendment right to free speech, and he's the most popular radio host in America. Some would say in a capitalist society, he deserves to be the highest paid person. But Clear Channel paying $400 million to Rush Limbaugh and laying off thousands of workers is a pretty obvious dichotomy. It's a pretty obvious problem. I just read an article 2 weeks ago about the latest round of radio station layoffs in Bakersfield, where local shows are being replaced with more syndication. A Clear Channel spokeswoman released this truly confounding statement. We have made some structural changes to extend our best practices across our organization and achieve a higher quality, more consistent news product for our listeners. Say what? Keep in mind, Clear Channel is the biggest owner of radio stations in the US. Number 2 is a company called Cumulus Media, which owns about 350 stations. Number 3 is Citadel, which runs about 250. They went bankrupt this past year and are now owned by lenders, including JP Morgan Chase. Educational Media Foundation runs 2 stations, K-Love, which is carried on over 400 FM frequencies in almost every state, and Air One, which is on about 75 stations. The Calvary Chapel Associated KAWZ from Twin Falls, Idaho, feeds about 400 broadcast translators and 24 full-power FM stations. So I did the math for you. That means around 2,300 radio stations in the US are owned by 5 companies. The problem is not all commercial media. Somebody's here from commercial media. It's big media that's the problem. In the US, and out of more than 1,500 commercial talk format stations, there are less than 30 doing all news. Can you believe that? I'm about ready to get on my tinfoil hat on these numbers. I mean, why would politicians call for the defunding of public broadcasting while powerful corporations keep firing and firing and firing everybody in newsrooms unless there is an inverse proportionality between profits and an ill-informed electorate? The commercial broadcasters lobby revealed recently they spent over $3.4 million on lobbying Congress just in 2010. Meanwhile, 30 million Americans tune into NPR each week and 30 million others at least once a month. And they're leveraging the growing online news audience. NPR is experiencing boom times. And it's no surprise. Like I said, there are less than 30 commercial stations in the United States doing an all-news format now. How many millions of people live in this country? I mean, I really don't have time to get into my criticisms of national NPR programming today. If you're interested, look up my recent article for Radio Survivor called NPR's Liberal Identity Crisis. There's a link over here. Recently, Ira Glass complained publicly that his colleagues sound like talking robots. To make matters worse, liberal satirist Harry Shearer of The Simpsons and KCRW's Le Show points out that these days at NPR, the initials stand for nothing. It's actually true. Vivian Schiller said, they're no longer National Public Radio, they're now NPR. Dr. Michael Eric Dyson told a crowd of community radio folks like us that although he personally wants to get his show distributed by NPR, the acronym stands for No Personality Required. Even the stuffy Financial Times calls NPR smug and boring. So I'm really thankful for the high bar that's been set by the more creative NPR stations like KHSU for production quality that keeps a lot of listeners tuning in. We all benefit when local radio jobs are supported by listeners. Environmentalist Bill Mckibben's favorite public radio personality is the witty Mr. Ira Glass. Mckibben made Glass the centerpiece of his recent feature for the New York Review of Books, admiring his, quote, commitment to covering the 330 degrees of life that didn't show up on the newscasts. It's about life the way most of us experience it, where heartbreak or lunch is as important as stock prices or distant revolutions. Back in August, Ira Glass drew knowing applause from a sold-out crowd at Seattle's Benaroya Hall with the admission he listens to NPR thinking, I would be a better person if I can get through this. The world they describe is much smaller than the real world, he continued. They sound like talking robots. The aesthetics of the language is so stiff. The goal for the creator and host of This American Life is, quote, to add fun, joyfulness, and surprise to stories. According to reports, he noted on stage that this never happens in broadcast journalism, which is a failure of craft. The bottom line is we need robust, diverse public radio, and we need it in every town. If you want to hear unpredictable, innovative, and authentic radio, you got to tune into the grassroots. I just want to make an extra plug for KHSU. I was doing some research on my, in the last couple days for coming up here, and I heard, for example, a great interview on KHSU with a touring band and a live performance. Now, don't take that for granted. A lot of NPR member stations and affiliates are not doing local cultural programming. So big thanks to KHSU for being one of the good guys. I don't know the politics locally, but as a listener, I was pleased with what I found. My point is not to rip every NPR person in the country. They're the best employer radio's got. But this is public media's moment. Activist Libby Reinisch of Free Press wrote in October on newpublicmedia.org, we must rebuild the charred remnants left behind by commercial media's slash and burn tactics, and we need all hands on deck in order to raise a new foundation for American journalism in its place. Common Frequency just received a $12,000 grant last month to do targeted outreach to community media access centers, like Wayne's World, or here at Access Humboldt. You guys know what I'm talking about. Prometheus is focusing on reaching out to communities who lack. Prometheus Radio Project, our partner, is focusing on reaching out to communities who lack a voice in local media, who want to cover issues underrepresented in the press. On their website, they have a great list of the kind of issues that they're hoping people will want to take on with new LPFM stations. They list global justice, cultural expression, economic justice, environment, immigrant rights, native rights, police accountability, racial justice, youth empowerment. If you want to hear what radio like this sounds like, again, admittedly, most of the people in this room know, but if you don't know what I'm talking about, check out We Are Radio Now, the radio special we produced at the Allied Media Conference in Detroit this summer. It's really incredible to hear the difference. The Local Community Radio Act will lead to the largest expansion in the number of community radio stations in U.S. history. But before local folks get to take a crack at navigating the FCC application process, which we expect will be not till 2012, let me point your attention to the work already well underway by the Radio for People Coalition. This loose collection of nonprofits, engineers, attorneys, consultants, and radio enthusiasts is working to support about 100 groups who are currently holding an FCC construction permit for brand new full power FM radio stations. Economic hardship is holding many of them back, and from the day a group is granted a permit, we only have 3 years to build your station, put a signal on the air, or you lose your license. Now, the cost to start a pirate station is like $250 plus a case of beer. The cost to start, right? The cost to start, but you don't need a 24-karat gold soapbox with radio. The cost to get up in the park. The cost to start an LPFM is maybe $25,000, and the cost to start a full power station is something like $250,000. But the same people who complain about Fox News or CNN or whatever don't seem to realize how valuable community media is by contrast. And I get asked everywhere I go, is radio still relevant? Is radio still relevant? I love this question. If you're wondering about the value of a radio license these days, ask the students at Rice University in Houston, where their college just secretly sold their station, KTRU, for $9.5 million. Or ask the students at University of San Francisco, whose college just sold KUSF for $3.75 million. People in suits literally converged on the station on a Tuesday morning a couple weeks back, surprising the DJ and kicking everyone out of the building. In the past 2 years, I've visited radio stations in Portland, Olympia, Seattle, Everett, Bellingham, Vancouver, Spokane, Moscow, Boise, Jackson Hole, Fort Collins, Boulder, the list goes on. It's funny, nobody tells me they're bored. Or there's no good music coming out. Or there's nothing happening around town worth talking about. Of course, everybody in this room knows the opposite is true. I think the two biggest reasons why people have this sense that radio's future is bleak are the limitations on what you can say or play over the air on AM and FM, and how easy it is becoming to get music or news from other equipment besides radios. Guess what the top 2 functions people used iPads for in 2010? You're thinking porn, but that's not it. News and music. Seriously. Pandora is extremely popular, and I think it's kind of fun for music discovery if you're willing to let algorithms tell you what music you might like. A lot of people are willing. And this month, Pandora announced their listening audience has now doubled to 75 million people. But remember, the more internet listeners you have, the more bandwidth you need, and the higher your royalties are to music performers and copyright holders. When you turn on an FM transmitter, it costs the same to reach 1 or 1 million FM listeners. Industry analysts seem to like Pandora's stock value right now. I read about this stuff all the time. If you want to find more, go to the Common Frequency Newswire. But they're also asking whether this is a business model that can scale or even survive long term. The more listeners we have, the more expensive it is to run our business. That's not actually the same problem with FM. Again, as I mentioned, you get your radio transmitter up. If 50,000 people move to Humboldt in the next 5 years, could happen, I don't know. It costs more for KMUD to operate their FM signals. But the more people who click and listen to your web stream, the more it costs to offer that. At the gathering hosted by the National Federation of Community Broadcasters this past summer, Minion Clyburn was the first FCC commissioner to address the conference in its decades-long history. And she talked about public service as a family value, community radio as an essential piece of the American experience. She said, if not for radio, I would have never become an FCC commissioner. She was invited early in her career to speak on a radio show at a Charleston station, she said. And she suggested that some say radio will fade away. But I, quote, however, see things quite differently. She said she will encourage others to follow suit in support of traditional radio. The FCC is trying to do its part to assist in development of community radio, she said. The FCC codified opportunities for native stations, she said, describing niche communities and linguistic minorities as important groups who need service. On the topic of the Local Community Radio Act, she pointed out there's only one LPFM station in the top 50 markets. She made no mention, however, of sticking up for the First Amendment in this country. What about when so-called family values are actually interfering with public service? You know what? After so many years in low-budget radio, I'm convinced that the chilling effects of fines from the FCC on what we play is one of the biggest reasons why young people are tuning out from traditional media. It is old-fashioned to think kids today haven't heard George Carlin's 7 words you can't say on television. And when an MC, well, they probably haven't heard George Carlin, but they've heard the words a lot. And when an MC writes a song about how bad Isht is effed up, there's a good chance the message will never get through. I personally never had time to edit about 50 tracks I liked that came out in 2010 for radio airplay, so I never spun them once. After lunch, when Commissioner Clyburn had given her talk at the NFCB conference in St. Paul, Pacifica Radio Executive Director Arlene Engelhardt and I approached Commissioner Clyburn and expressed concern about the chilling effect of the FCC's indecency regime on programming at small-budget stations. I gave the example of the decision not to air the annual reading of the Penelope chapter from James Joyce's Ulysses on WBAI in New York. Arlene mentioned that 10 years ago on WNMF, they ran a carefully selected portion of the Vagina Monologues, but would never dare to do that now out of fear of massive indecency fines. So, to my knowledge, there have been no new indecency fines issued under Obama's FCC. If anybody in the room knows of something in the last 2 years, let me know, but I think there haven't been new ones. But under George W. Bush's FCC, KBOO in Portland was fined $7,000 because the FCC felt "Your revolution will not happen between these thighs" by Sarah Jones was, quote, designed to pander and shock. A commercial station in Colorado was fined another $7,000 for not doing a thorough enough job editing The Real Slim Shady by Eminem. And the FCC used what it called, quote, contemporary community standards. What was really funny about these incidents was that after legal challenges, the FCC changed their minds and withdrew the fines. KBOO, as I'm sure Bear knows and a few other of you might know, KBOO actually spent more than $7,000 to defend themselves. But it was really awesome that John Kriegler, their attorney, and KBOO were ultimately successful in getting the FCC to drop the fine. But it cost them 5 figures to defend themselves. But you got to love this quote from an FCC Enforcement Bureau guy about the Sarah Jones song. This is another one of these great quotes. So you got the Clear Channel press statement earlier that I gave you. Check this one out. "We disagree with our initial analysis, and now conclude it was not patently offensive." I got 1 minute with Obama's new FCC General Counsel, Austin Schlick. This is immediately after a panel at South by Southwest in March. He was careful not to say anything I could write about, But he made it sound like he viewed the Bush-era FCC's legal cases against broadcasters as a hassle, right? He's the head attorney for the FCC. And now he has to go and argue the Bush FCC's positions as his job description, right? In 2011, he will very likely be taking the issue back to the Supreme Court, since federal appeals courts keep throwing bogus FCC language police cases out. On my KDRT radio show, January 19th, I asked Casey Ray Hunter from the Future of Music Coalition about bad words on the radio. He said, quote, "At the end of the day, the problem is basically with the FCC's vague and arbitrary policy. I think the courts are thankfully being consistent in saying that it's not that you shouldn't have an indecency policy, it's that this one is like impossible to enforce." And also, they're listening to what not just Future of Music Coalition is saying, but a host of other folks who are concerned about this are saying about the chilling effect that this has on expression and creativity. So I've got to wrap up, but let me give you one more fundamentally important reason that radio still matters. This week, the Egyptian government blacked out internet access for its citizens. This has been called unprecedented in internet history. I heard on the radio this week that the U.S. backs the Egyptian government with $1 billion a year, though I haven't had a chance to fact check that. I don't know if anybody in the room is an expert. Yeah, so I heard that on the radio, right?
Second most funding after Israel from our government.
Thank you. I heard about clandestine activity on shortwave radio because of the struggle of the Egyptians to reach people. And I read a hobbyist site that claims there were over 1,000 weekly broadcasting hours of political clandestine activity in 2010. Shortwave was thought to be one of the only ways people under this blackout would be able to get information out of Egypt. But other than thinking globally, why is this significant here in Eureka, in the great US of A? Because of separate and not so equal internet for mobile news and independent musicians. Now, I heard someone mention the internet kill switch that Joe Lieberman has proposed. Talk about that another day. Josh Stearns of Free Press wrote on SaveTheNews.org that in the final weeks of 2010, the FCC approved weak, half-baked net neutrality rules so full of loopholes that they may be worse than nothing at all. The result is that for the first time in the history of telecommunications law in this country, the FCC has endorsed online discrimination. That is, ISPs now appear to have the right to favor their services and applications over others. Because remember, you're talking about transmission companies who are also content providers. If you run the pipes and you can make people go to your content, why would you let all the other content load just as fast? You got shareholders to serve, right? On the wireless web, you access from a mobile phone or device, companies like AT&T and Verizon will be free to discriminate. Remember, this was an Obama campaign pledge. Sorry, gotta stay focused. That means we now have 2 internets in America, and what you are able to access at home may not be available on your smartphone. The FCC's decision to split the web in 2 has huge implications for journalism and free speech, as new and old news organizations have been investing deeply in mobile apps and online news. In addition, a third of America still lacks high-speed broadband access at home. That's not just whether or not you choose to get it. That's a third who don't have access. With the digital divide widening and the open internet disappearing, the democratizing power of the web is at risk. That's Josh Stearns on New Public Media, on Save the News. On my radio show January 19th, Casey Ray Hunter from Future of Music also talked about the open internet creating a level playing field and free market for working musicians. Now, Future Music Coalition is not as politically aggressive as Free Press, so Casey was careful to say that he doesn't think the FCC's new net neutrality policy goes far enough, but he doesn't say that they don't like it. Free Press is clear that they don't like it. What Casey said is, quote, "What we're concerned about is the ISP charging the content providers, like anybody that actually puts stuff up on the internet that people want, a higher price for the faster delivery of their sites and services." Basically, to drill this down for folks who are in the creative community, particularly on the independent side, hi, local band, that could become the new payola. You just simply couldn't compete. And the thing that we really have always loved about the internet is we know it is the fact that it functions, as we know it, is the fact that it functions on that open access principle. We think that maybe the handful of corporations that own the infrastructure of the internet, at least to the consumer in the United States, shouldn't be able to pick favorites. Casey concluded, for us, it's about musicians being able to take charge of their own careers and reach their audiences and cultivate these amazing kind of back and forth conversations and relationships with audiences and other musicians without having to go through the same kind of gatekeeper, bottleneck, permissions-based payola system that was so common in the old music industry. So I want to leave time for questions. Just let me rattle off a couple of my favorite things right now. They're up on the board. First, when I say Twitter, you all groan. That's your cue? Twitter. Oh, I hate Twitter. It's just like rich people talking about the sandwiches they ate. Well, it's really important for tracking breaking news. And I want you to go out and use hashtags to search topics, and you'll be glad you did. So right over here I have Twitter, and then I have a hashtag for you, Media Justice. Try it out. Next up, I collect news articles about radio and digital music and link to them from our website at commonfrequency.org. Just go to the homepage and click on my face. Also, we're developing custom solar-powered FM transmitter trailers for broadcasting from off-the-grid tower locations. If anybody up here knows anything about that kind of stuff, talk to us. Thanks. Radio Survivor and Broadcast Law Blog are great. I love that name, Broadcast Law Blog. Are great places to go for breaking news that's relevant to community radio, and Benton provides daily headlines on just about all of the most important technology politics happening in the English language. There's some links there, radiosurvivor.com, broadcastlawblog.com, benton.org. Also, I want to encourage you to look at the handsome, especially for those of you radio folks in the room, look at the handsome Tumblr page that NPR has been using. For visual learners like me, the simple layout is great, and I think it's really effective to add images to radio station websites. We too often forget that people listen to us all the time. We have this rich, vivid imagery in their minds, and they come to our radio station websites and they see an afterthought. Because we make radio. We don't necessarily make websites. What I really like about NPR's Tumblr, which you can link to at npr.tumblr.com, here on the board, is it's for the visual learner. And you don't have to navigate a complicated website. You don't have to go click on a lot of stuff. It's just a stream of consciousness about things that NPR has done. And I think it's really effective and it's simple. And we could all be on Tumblr. All of our radio stations could be on Tumblr. You don't need to hire a tech person to do that. I just got to say, as a huge music geek, that just about my favorite thing happening for consumers lately is MP3 blogs. For many of you, that's nothing new. But if you have no idea what I'm talking about, do yourself a favor and write down this website, hypem.com. That's hypem.com. Go there and enter an artist, like, let's say, Diplo, who has been seen all over TV ads lately for BlackBerry. Everyone sees like this DJ who's like running around the world with his BlackBerry. That's actually a pretty legitimate producer. I don't know what he's doing advertising Blackberries. But if you put in Diplo on Hypem, you'll immediately find 50 blogs that have just posted his latest remix. And it works with all sorts of genres of music, generally toward a youth-focused music scene, but anything. And Hypem is just an aggregator. MP3 blogs are everywhere. I really think that radio stations should be thinking about getting in the MP3 blog business. Who here at a radio station has music sent to their station? Did those people send the music to your station because they don't want you to get it out there? Right? Of course not. So it takes energy as a music director to contact labels and artists and promoters, but radio can be part of MP3 blog media. I mean, it's a really easy way to say, hey, you came to our event, you pledged to our station, go to our site and grab some free music. You also don't have to only give MP3 links to artists who are already advertising for BlackBerry. I heard on KMUD yesterday like 15 songs in a row that I'd never heard before, and I found out it was a live and local show. It was all artists from Sohum and Eureka and Arcata and these other places you guys mentioned I haven't been to yet. And that was amazing. 15 songs in a row. They were good. They were local. Way to go, KMUD. I bet you a lot of those artists wouldn't mind if people outside of your FM area or outside of your live streaming listening audience would be able to go and grab a couple of those tracks off your website. I wouldn't suggest posting people's music without talking to them first, but people do that too. Now, Bandcamp, the digital DIY music platform, has found its footing, and I think the future of online music distribution for independents is looking brighter than ever. That doesn't mean instead of radio, but in the past 30 days alone, artists have made over $500,000 selling their music on Bandcamp. They didn't have to give any money to iTunes. They didn't have to give any money to Amazon. They didn't have to give any money to the last 4 remaining record label conglomerates. And another service that's very controversial, especially with policy people, is this whole idea of having to pay royalties for the music you play. The FM and AM radio stations do not have to pay for performance royalties, but you do have to pay for copyright holders. When you're internet broadcasting, in theory, you're supposed to be paying sound exchange based on rates negotiated by the Copyright Royalty Board, whose existence is questionable as a constitutional thing. But we'll talk about that another day. But if you know musicians, tell every artist you know with recordings in circulation that they've performed on to file with Sound Exchange and get paid royalties. Just for example, Sound Exchange says they've got $10 million for artists they have contacted more than 5 times who haven't registered yet. So Sound Exchange is sitting on millions and millions of dollars in royalties. Now, again, this whole system is debatable, but there are musicians right now today who are owed royalties who just haven't registered with Sound Exchange. So at least we as radio can encourage musicians to go and get themselves registered and get some paychecks. It's not going to maybe pay your health insurance, but it might, fix your guitar tuner. Last but not least, I want to mention Audacity 1.3, which is free open source audio editing software that works on Macs and PCs. Sam, who is hosting me here in Eureka, thank you, dude. He tells me he's been using it to record vinyl straight into his laptop. I swear by it, and it's still in beta, but it's free. You can use it on Macs and PCs. And the last thing I promise, we got to get students into studios, learning. Media literacy is fundamentally important to democracy. Thanks so much for listening. I hope there's time for questions. Cheers. Ciao. I went faster than I thought. We're only a couple minutes after 2. Yeah, I know. Maybe I should have gone slower. So one of the big questions is LPFM. What's going on? In this town, there's already so much radio. I don't know if there's anybody in this room who's trying to start another new LPFM station, but LPFM likely will come into some serious conflict at the FCC this year because there are about 6,000 applications pending for translators. And if you listen to KMUD on different signals, you probably have an idea what translators are about. But the problem is, it's a long story, but the problem is the FCC has to decide between translators and LPFM applications and figure out how to deal with that. Most likely LPFM applications will begin to be accepted in early 2012, but we don't know that exactly yet. One other thing you all should know about is PTFP, the funding for capital. That window to apply for Department of Commerce funding for capital expenditures for your radio station it is expected to be opening in early March. Those are 2 of the questions we get asked a lot is, when's LPFM going to happen and when's the next PTFP window? So trying to cut you off at the pass. Sean?
Oh, I was just curious if you could give us a real quick perspective on if I had a pirate radio station, what would be the pros and cons of trying to get LPFM license or to convert to a license setup?
Yeah, that's a good question. As a member of AmeriCorps, I probably already said things I'm not supposed to say today. I personally really love freeform radio, and I think that we have a dangerous regime of repression of speech in this country, and we're one of the best in the world, which is scary. So as far as pirate radio goes, I guess officially I can say I believe in the First Amendment. And then unofficially I can say it's probably not a good idea to tell the FCC that you're a pirate station when you apply for an LPFM. But I think there are advantages and disadvantages. The reason I'm not personally involved in pirate anymore is I personally believe that we should build sustainable alternatives. I'm not saying that if you have an unlicensed station that's unsustainable, but if the FCC comes and tries to stop you and then they have to come back, I don't know why you'd be in the same place again after the first time, but they can take your gear. So that's one of the big things about LPFM. They're not allowed to take your gear. It doesn't mean they won't someday, tinfoil hat, woo! But they're not allowed to take your gear if you're in LPFM. So that's a big thing to think about. But I wouldn't encourage the proud, loud, unlicensed radio community to say to the FCC, well, we've been on the air for 5 years. You should totally give us an LP. That's probably not gonna be a winning strategy.
What do you think about the concept of citizens being prepared and ready to defend themselves against the federal invaders, basically coming to jack their stuff? It seems a little radical, but I think that's really where we're heading. That there's going to be more incidents like this of people putting their foot down and saying to screw off to these foreign bureaucrats and really do nothing that's helpful for us, but everything that seems to be counterintuitive to our freedoms.
Well, I personally want an FCC. And I know that's not going to be popular in this town, but just because I know the climate of people here is like, why do we need bureaucrats from DC telling us what to do about anything? And I respect that. But the problem with having no FCC is right now the FCC works for Congress. If you have no FCC, then you're expecting Congress to be in charge of media policy. And that might be good in theory sometimes. Sometimes it's good. Senator Cantwell has been a change agent for public media. You know, that's the example of someone, you know, there's some strange bedfellows in the LPFM movement. You know, there are some strange ones. But my point is, there is nobody in the FCC I've ever heard of who I agreed with on everything. But there are engineers who work at the FCC who understand that LPFM will provide local service and that they want to see this happen. You know, the FCC's been handcuffed on LPFM for years because of bad legislation in Congress. So you kind of have to pick on each particular issue who you really want to shake your fist at. And on indecency policy and language police, yeah, you should look at the FCC. But that's also Congress too. So I guess I'm trying to think. I had one other answer for your question, which was that it's really scary when the federal marshals shoot pirate operators' dogs.
I have a question that might tie in with what that gentleman said. He said it, but could you update us on? I haven't read all the details of what was recently passed. I don't know what they were talking about previously within the FCC ties in with what they actually passed, but previously when we had the Grassroots Radio Conference, Prometheus did one of our sessions and they informed everybody about different issues that the FCC was deliberating on or talking about or shelving. And one of those was local and how local actually can be written into LPFM or the different laws that FCC is looking at. And local in that context meant, do you have to have a live person in your station to actually be able to get an LPFM, or can you be a Christian radio station and air 23 hours of programming from elsewhere but have one local person actually there operating the little turning table? Did they get that sorted out within the new Community Radio Act?
Good question. One of the things that's bizarre is that you can what's called studio wave a full power FM station, but you can't do that with an LPFM. It's interesting that one of the ways that these like Educational Media Foundation and Calvary Chapel, these major religious broadcasters, one of the ways that they have so many stations is they can basically what's called studio wave and not have to build a studio for a full power station. But LPFM has really strict rules about that. We're not thrilled with the language that actually came in the final version of the Local Community Radio Act. I kind of want to give a little bit of a quick background on what happened to that, because I think that's really important for y'all to understand in terms of how the U.S. Senate works, not just for radio. But just so I'll get to that. But I think specifically that the thing that the FCC is probably going to get sued by somebody about this in the next 2 years. I wish it wouldn't happen. I want them to just somehow magically wave their engineers' fingers and make it all make sense. But basically, the LPFMs have not been allowed to have new LPFMs now for 10 years because of bad laws. But then the FCC went ahead and opened a window for translators. So now there's thousands of translator applications that have been pending, and then there's this LPFM new window. Well, so how does the FCC determine what to do? Common Frequency is very involved in this, doing research and providing comments to the FCC. I think the best way to think about it is translators are absolutely a fundamental part of public service. Just for example, in Idaho where I lived, the public television station had something like 30 or 40 translators just to try to cover everybody's homes with a public TV signal. So you can't be anti-translators in your support of LPFM. But it's a mess, and there are LPFM supporters who will never get a station because of translators and vice versa. So as far as what is actually in the law, it's a really short law. I would encourage you to read it. I believe it's Senate Bill 592, if you want to look it up, the Local Community Radio Act. And you can find a lot of links to this kind of stuff on prometheusradio.org. But in terms of the final language that came out, it came about from a really screwy process. And basically the thing you need to know is that there's been a major barrier to the Local Community Radio Act in the Senate for the past couple of years, which is a procedural trick that's called anonymous holds. Right. So just this week, the Senate passed on a 92-4 vote some rule changes, and they supposedly did away with anonymous holds. I'm sure there's some other way that they'll do something like this. But what was interesting, too, was that this was the first time that the Tea Party caucus officially voted on something, and they voted no on getting rid of the anonymous holds. So the 92-4 was Rand Paul and Jim DeMint, and it happened to be 4 Republicans. I'm not trying to lobby you to vote for a certain party. I'm just saying that in this case, there were these 4 who said, no, we want to be able to anonymously stop things from happening beyond any accountability. So that's been happening to Prometheus for several years. What was so scary was this anonymous hold process has been commonplace in the Senate. What was scary about this was the learning about this kind of sausage factory of building legislation in D.C. So since I've been involved with Common Frequency, because we're part of the Digital Arts Service Corps, I have not been in any way involved in the LPFM campaign. That's actually a true fact. I'm not involved in DC since August, just based on the rules of our job. But what they found was this was a matter of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 senators passing anonymous holds back and forth. Every 2 weeks, they could stop a bill from coming up to vote. What this is about is most of the activity in the Senate is so small scale that it never comes to the floor. For example, naming a post office. And so when these things happen, they do basically what's like a does anybody oppose this? No? Okay, we just move on. It's just basically like a check-in. I don't know the mechanics of if they call around office to office or if it's email or what, but so somehow they can anonymously hold it. How that even like to try to get a mental picture of how an anonymous hold works is like it's like a ghost, like what's an anonymous hold? Like if someone's anonymously holding me, I would find them, they're right there. So I don't know, it's confusing, but what they found, this has been commonplace, and what they found was Prometheus would work all across the country in these different areas, and they go, okay, well, we think it might be from Texas. So then people from Texas go and have meetings, and the people from Texas say, oh, no, we're not doing it. And then the holds just got passed back and forth and passed back and forth. And this prevented the Local Community Radio Act from passing for the last 3 years, just this tactic. And remember, what Maria Cantwell said in her interview on NPR about this, right before the bill finally passed, was she said, it's not just radio. Like hundreds of bills that would have had 92 or 95 yes votes, guaranteed, were never even allowed to come up for a vote because of this ability to do these anonymous holds. So they finally, the Senate did this week. This past week, they voted to stop that rule. We'll see how that shakes out. But I do encourage you to read the language of the bill. That we're not thrilled with it, but the important thing to remember, and this is probably a great thing for me to say as my last word, the National Association of Broadcasters said, okay, we're tired of you guys coming in cheerleader suits and making us look bad outside our building. We're going to go ahead and have our senators remove their holds. So, that's not a direct quote, but that's what they're like. When finally Prometheus was willing to agree to whatever the final terms were of the final bill that's written, then the NAB said, okay, we'll let this bill pass in Congress in the United States. So that's a good lesson for how these industries work. It's not as encouraging as I was hoping to end on.
It's pretty encouraging. Cool. So thanks very much to Gavin Dahl. So I think now I'd like to invite representatives from the stations that are present.
When we get people into Blue Ox Radio that are interested in being on the air, either as a producer or a DJ or interview person, whatever they want to do, one of the first things we do is put them into the booth on a live show, immersion. Okay, you got it. But it's amazing what a person can learn, and we just do it on a gradient. First thing we might do is have them read a PSA. Second thing we might do is just have them observe, and then when they've done that for a couple hours, actually have them run the board, show them how to do it. It's not that scary. And if you do it on a gradient, they can grab it. And we have the producer, unfortunately, is not here today. But one of the greatest shows I've ever heard on radio is Teen Platform that we have. And it's produced by the Humboldt County School District, by students. They voice it, they edit it, they come up with the topics, and there's no holds barred. These kids are fantastic. So they can learn at an early age. We can all do it. So it's basically...
Let me back up just a little bit to tell you the basics about what our station is, because we're a little bit different. A lot different. It's an educational station, and we were able to get a permit because it is an educational station. It was one of those harebrained ideas that my husband said, oh, why don't we get a radio station? We have Blue Ox Millworks, and we have Blue Ox Community School. So, which is a partnership. So then we said we should have a radio station. So we happened to be in just the right time when we got a permit. We have a core group of volunteers, and sometimes we're told, why don't you do a show about this? Why don't you do a show about that? And we can't get into anything really political or really controversial because we choose to be educational and open. So we're a little bit stricter than some of the other stations. We're kind of beginning to open the doors up, but we have to be really careful. It's also been suggested that I sell the station because I could make a lot of money. People have this idea that if you have a station, then you obviously have a very lucrative asset. Obviously, we can't do that. Our station is for educational purposes. So Larry here is one of our key volunteers with many, many years in the radio industry down in San Francisco
Bay Area, Hollywood.
Right. So he's been a huge asset to train people and not only the technical but the interviewing skills and so forth. So anybody who's interested, check out our website, give us a call, and we can pretty much work with you in any way to help you learn and go where you want to go from there.
If I could add something to that, Viviana, one of the things that we can do, we can train people how to write PSAs, train them how to write news releases, train them in, as you said, in interview skills. And we're there to do that.
It's educational.
This is our 30th year of operation.
Whoa.
Back when we started, we kind of backed into this radio business. Somebody in the planning department got across their desk in this Federal Register, "Oh, you can apply for these licenses." And about that time, the FCC was approached by a National Federation for Community Broadcasters and some other people pointing out that, you don't have enough minority-owned stations and stations owned by women, people of color and all. And maybe it would be good to do that. And so the FCC says, yeah, okay. So they opened up X number of licenses, and 14 of them were for Native American communities and tribes. Well, 98 tribes applied for those 14 licenses, and we got one of them. And this was back in, we signed on the air December 16th, 1980. Curious thing about Indian radio, Native radio, and I'm still 30 years playing around with this. This is the only station I've ever been involved with, the only station I will be involved with, well, at this level anyway. I do deal in other things, but I'm really curious about what will radio do in the future, and especially Native radio, and what does it mean to have a radio station? It's a tool. That's what I say. It's a tool. That's what we call it today. And how do we use that tool? When I was driving on over here, I was thinking about that. And I got to thinking, we've all used media. We've all used media. From the Declaration of Independence to wanted posters to, it's media, telegraph, telephone, smartphones, dumb phones, radio, TV. We've all used media. So those are all tools. I got thinking, okay. How do you use that tool? What do you use that tool for? And I got thinking, well, we're the gatekeepers. We're the ones, whoever is in control of this microphone and those equipment and everything and broadcasting and everything, what we select to be on the air and what we select not to be on the air is a function of a tool. So we, as individuals, are also tools. Now we're dissecting it really well. So now I'm thinking, okay, and this question that's put for us right now is about volunteering and how do you get started and how does somebody get involved in it? Well, I look at people who want to get involved in something. You always look at people, you got all these sport teams and everything, and you got all these people running around and say, oh yeah, I want my kid on the front line there and be a big star and everything. All right, well, that's what we kind of need. What happens in communities is what adults help to initiate Blue Ox Radio. It wasn't started by a group of kids say, hey, I want a radio station. It was started by an idea from an adult said, you know, it'd be a good idea to have a radio station. Why don't we do a radio station? And so now you got this format. And I really respect what they've done, because actually I've took some of those things that you've been doing and I say, hey, you know, that really works well. I took your producer's thing, and you want to produce a radio station? You want to, a program, or do you want to be a DJ? You know, so I looked at your format and everything. That's pretty sharp, you know. I really like the way that's formatted. So, boom, you go on our website and you'll see our version of the same thing. And
We did the same thing.
yeah, so somebody out there has already done this. And so then where are tools? How do we use that? And I'm thinking, yeah. Somebody once told me that the golden age of radio has not yet happened. I mean, we always think about, well, the golden age of radio, that was back in the 40s and 30s, you know, got all these things. He said, no, it has not yet happened, because no one has really achieved something really different, really monumental yet. And we use this tool. And what do we use this tool for? And as tools, how do we combine our tool sets? So when we started the radio station, we made a mistake. In my vision, we made a mistake, because we went out saying, because we had a bunch of young people who the average age of the people involved was 22. So, sound like good, good idea. All right, we want a radio station. So they went out and surveyed the community, and so what do you want this radio station to be like? And of course they pushed for rock and roll. And so we had all these choices, and make sure you get your friends to put this in. And so we ended up being a rock and roll station in the beginning. And is that a good use for a tool? As a tool for the community? Maybe, but then you got all these other sources and choices for music. What about education? What about information? What about the things that people need to have in order to make a better choice in life? Whether it be it government, health, environment. So now I'm looking at KIDE as being a tool for social change, being a tool that advocates environmental justice. And that's my focus now. I'm looking at people who come to us and say, you know, I would like to learn how to produce a program. Mostly we get people say, I want to play this music. I want to do hip hop, and I want to do jazz, or we do a lot of blues and hip hop, music choices anyway. And we got a lot of people. At one time we had 22 people who kept this station pumping. And now I'm down to 4 full-time paid people, maybe 3 or 4 volunteers who do nothing but music shows. I don't have any people coming and say, I want to learn how to do news. I want to learn how to do documentaries. You know, so I'm thinking, okay, now I'm going to have to shift my gears and figure out, well, how do you attract those kinds of people? Okay, and in our 30th year, that's one of my goals, is figure out how to do this. I'm going to have to do a lot more outreach. I've heard some people talk about, you know, Gavin was talking about this more than what do you also have on your website, but what else do you do in your community? How do you bring social awareness and social change to the community without broadcasting? Now, Keat TV does it very well. You know, Humboldt 5 Humboldt, whatever it is. They do a lot of outreach, so I don't keep going. I look at people who want to get involved. I hire people. I only hired one person in the last 3 or 4 years, but that was the person who came to me and says, I see you need some help. Let me help you. I can do this. And then I end up showing that person how to do something else. And then they say, you know, you got to do this. We're part of a tribal government. So we have to go through policies and hiring procedures. And if I'm going to be paying this person, they've got to go through this whole rigmarole thing. And so I have to open up the position. And so once you open up the position, you get all kinds of people say, oh, no, look at, because high unemployment, people want money. So they need it. So I go through this whole thing, and one of the first questions I always ask, and I put a lot of points to it, says, have you ever worked in a radio station? Have you ever done this job right here? And so it's kind of a filtering system, and yes, it's biased, but I get the employee who's got the experience. And that's how, if you take a look at every one of our full-time employees right now, and I've been there at the station for 30 years, well, as a board of directors, took over as manager in 1988, and we've got 2 other full-time people who've got more than 15 years experience doing what they're doing. But they all started as volunteers. We all started as volunteers. I started as a volunteer, and yes, I agree. That's how you do. You just throw them in there, let them sink or swim, and that's how I started, and being an on-air person. People didn't. Once my volunteers learned that I knew how to do this, they said, "Oh, wow, let him come in early." They stopped coming in early. Like, he'll do it. He's got to sign on. Let him do it.
That's how I learned too.
Yeah. So that's how you do learn, and you attract people. You kind of work the people who want to be involved in whatever it is they want to be involved with. They want to be broadcasters. They want to be journalists, producers, engineers, interviewers. Yeah. Just work with the people who come to you, but make it available. Just announce it a lot that we are looking for people who are interested in doing this. And if they want to volunteer to do a music show, okay, that's okay too. But get the word out. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Next.
Well, you're a hard act to follow. Boy. Is this close enough? Yes? Okay. First, I'll tell you a little bit about me. I've been in media in Humboldt County for over a decade now, and a lot of my background came from the TV industry. I worked extensively in commercial TV particularly. I did get my start in public broadcasting as an intern at Keat TV. I started out there because I always saw myself as a very visual person, and so radio wasn't the first thing that popped to mind to me. And then a few years ago, I started working in radio and realized how much I really loved it and how much I saw it as a viable tool, like everyone's been saying, for the community. I think that the future of broadcasting is changing so dramatically that we're going to see the broadcast television model really going by the wayside. This is my personal opinion on that. Because people are changing the way they consume media. There's, like we've been talking about, a lot more people going out and grabbing what they want as opposed to passively receiving the media. The one place where I don't see that happening as much is radio, because what people will do is they won't watch a rerun on TV or they won't watch something, they'll go find it on the computer. But what they do when there's an earthquake, what's the first thing you do is you turn on your radio. What do you do when you're in the car? A lot of times you turn on the radio. That's where you are. There are a few people that use satellite, but I don't honestly know a lot of people that use satellite radio, and I think that a lot of people really like what we produce in this area locally, because where else are you going to find out about not only the cow in the road, but who's running or being recalled for the DA? Things like this. That's why local radio is great.
Or where the law enforcement.
Or where the law enforcement are. That's a whole other one. And our opinions on, yeah. At KMUD specifically, it's really a people-produced radio. I really like the fact that depending on when you tune in, you could get Andean flute music or you could get a talk show about women's issues. It really encompasses the entire community, and there are a few, I would say, underrepresented groups within KMUD, and one of my hopes specifically is to go after. This is true with all nonprofits right now. We're really missing the youth. We really need to go out there and get the kids coming in and working on it. I love that Terry and a couple of the other folks are working with South Fork High to do news programs and things along those lines. That's not you?
I'm not. They are awesome and produce their own show. But
they have it.
Support them. I'm their cheerleader.
Right. Cheerleader. That's good. But just getting out there and you were saying outreach, talking to people, letting them know that these tools exist and to come and take part of it. One of the things I also like is not only do we have diverse content, is that I really feel that with radio stations, anything you're interested in, we probably have a job for you. If you're interested in technology, I'm sure in our station, Simon would love to have you come and help. If you're interested in building computer programs, there's always music is obviously. Is that not true?
No, they have a long relationship, and Dave's
You can't
excited.
wait for me to get to that microphone, but I promise not to burn you too hard.
Oh no.
They've known each other for a long time. It's okay. Keep going.
Some of that, yeah. That's typical Humboldt County for you, though. Don't we all know each other?
Know each other.
Oh, we all go way back.
Yep.
At KMUD, we have about 9 paid employees and over 100 volunteers, and we're always looking for new people. And part of my role there is really just to support the volunteers and let the staff know on a daily basis that I love them dearly, and to make sure that the board and the staff communicate well. And like I said, any interest people have out there, we just need to get the word out there. And if you're interested, give us a call.
Do you want to follow up with?
No.
Yeah, let's
I'll
intersperse
breathe.
it.
Yeah, it's all
Breathe,
good.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the challenges of being in commercial radio in the state of California is we're not allowed to have volunteers legally. It's against the law. It's against labor law. And so we can have interns, but they have to meet a very kind of strict standard, including the fact that they have to actually be getting credit for it from a recognized institution. So we have, it's a challenge for us. We have had, I think we've got 4 current employees who started out as interns. We love interns. Interns are great. But the other way to get in the door is just to kind of come in the door and, just kind of talk to us for a long time and try to persuade us that there's a role for you at our stations. And, our training program is pretty simple, kind of not dissimilar to the Blue Ox theory. We put you in front of a microphone. We say, push that button to turn the mic on, push that button to play the CD player. Whatever you do, don't push F2. Don't ask us why. Just don't push it. And please don't say fuck on the air. And, here's our cell phone number. Call us if you have any problems. And but we do listen to you, and we will give you feedback afterwards.
That's right.
But one of the things that we've really prided ourselves is, and I think people underestimate the interactiveness of radio. We get a lot of information from our listeners. And my guys, and actually I've been filling in this week because one of my employees is out on paternity leave. And so I've actually been on the air, which I don't do very often, but I like to do it to show everybody, yes, I know how to do this. And but the way the job has evolved now, we've got Google G Chats, and we've got all this stuff up on the screen, and we are getting phone calls, and and it is a very, very interactive thing, which is great because it makes it a community radio station, and it's also where we get a lot of great information. It's our news gathering thing, and we like to be kind of underestimated as a news source. We don't have an official news capacity, but we just do news when it happens. And as I say to people, some days there is no news. So in Humboldt, so why have a news department? But because we're also very free form in our structure, we can break in the moment something happens. We're not interrupting a program, we're not interrupting somebody's show, we're just going with it. And so, and the fact that we do have, live people in the studios, gives us the ability to react quickly to an earthquake, react quickly to something like that. So, but it's kind of a different structure than a lot of the public radio because of the fact that we just can't have the volunteers.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, so my name is Terry, and I'm a big cheerleader, like I said, for journalism, just spreading the journalism vibe all over the place, whether you believe in or have the capacity to have news departments or whatever kind of news you can disseminate. I advocate that you do that. And so I started this community journalism project after being at an NFCB conference in 2008 because I met all these cool news directors from all over the country and learned that they have like 100 volunteers just in their newsroom. And I thought, well, there's no way I can get that many volunteers, probably, but I could definitely open up our newsroom, which we'd never done before. So I borrowed materials from Bend, Oregon, the wonderful people up there, KPOV. They wrote their own, what they call Citizen Journalism Manual, and you can get it free from them. They encourage everybody to do the same thing that I'm doing, is use their manual as a template and then come up with your own materials for your area, the country, and your climate in your radio station. And then go with that. And I've also hoped to, this is like a dream come true, have conversations with KHSU, with KHUM, with KIDE, with Blue Ox about starting their own news departments or just doing more with news or collaborating or whatever works. so that we can get more information out there to the public. KHAM does a great job of interrupting their shows and doing breaking news, which is vital, obviously. But I also am a firm believer in political discourse, and news to me is, I love the Grassroots Radio Conference model, or GRC, and so I really believe that we need to, as citizens, enable people who don't have a voice in the greater community. So I really believe in trying to get more Native voices out there, trying to get more immigrant voices out there, trying to get minority voices out there at all, whatever that is to you. And through this journalism project, we hope to reach out to more communities that aren't necessarily served by what we all conceptualize as community radio. So Fortuna, or wherever, they don't have a lot of what I see as community radio happening, a lot of discourse about what's going on in their community, really. And I really think that we could all help each other have that discourse, which will help us elect people and will help us maybe solve domestic violence or whatever. So it's always good to create those conversations. And so at KMUD, I only am in the newsroom, and so I have the Community Journalism Project, and everybody's invited to participate, whether you like to type and retype CHP releases about death and mayhem, which is always needed, or if you want to learn how to edit and audio edit, if you're a geek about computer stuff, we need help with that. Or if you want to learn how to produce your own story, then we walk you through that process as well. So that's it. And today I'm going to be going through our basic class that talks about ethics and talks about what you need to produce a radio story, like the nuts and bolts, and then some other fun stuff later.
Right on.
Yeah.
And I had to leave. I had to leave KMUD in 2006 and start my own station. And I did it with the engineer, LaVon Perkins, who recently died at KMUD. He did a lot of everything as a temporary part-time employee for, how long was he there? Like 18 years?
Yep.
Long time. And my problem happened with me is I'm into the rock and roll scene. KMUD didn't want it. They made sure we understood that after 8 years. With many political meetings and situations, we understood that they didn't want hard rock and heavy metal and our kind of people there. And that's a quote. So we got pretty stoned and drunk one night, about 8 of us, and we went out and bought our own transmitter. We gave him the finger. And all we wanted to do was have our own music and do our own little thing and be involved in radio. And that's kind of what happened. So in the wintertime, we run a 100-watt transmitter off of a hydro. And we do not have live radio. We have a 160 gig iPod that's downloaded with all kinds of hard rock music and whatever else we want to put on there, John Trudell, whatever, spoken word, whatever's in the mood. And we cycle that on out of 2 terabytes of hard drive. And we are hoping to get out of a 8x8 homemade box and move into a 25-foot camper trailer that we have already got. And Solar Dan lived in it. Took care of it, kept it clean so that we would be able to use this vehicle for our remote station.
What number are you guys on the dial?
You have to go up into the watershed and hit your scanner and look for it, because it's never the same thing.
Okay.
But it is a hard rock heavy metal, and nobody else plays it in this county, and you can't miss it.
Nice. All right.
Right now, we're not on the air. We have 4 pallets of 16 L60 batteries, and each pallet holds 16 batteries. So you see the amount of power, 48-volt inverter, keeping everything going, enough water. And our batteries are running a little bit old. We use recycled equipment. Everything is recycled. I went to all kinds of sales and just tried to buy things LaVon did too. And so now we're trying to replace a lot of the equipment and alternative energy power plant systems to keep the station on the air longer, because things, it's old, it's used, and we need to replace it. And that's where we're at now. We're hoping to have a live transmission with a DJ inside the camper. We hope to do that this winter. Doesn't know if we're going to do that. Okay, again, it's a powering of the equipment and paying for the equipment in order to have that happening for us. And we always have to move our transmitter, so we're kind of sick of that. And so we have this camper, remote camper, and that's what our plan is. And if we can hold it together, we do expect to become a low power legal station.
Stories like that make you love radio. KHSU is the NPR station for the North Coast area. I guess in a lot of ways, people might consider us the establishment public radio station or the institutional public radio station. We're licensed to Humboldt State University. As I said, we are the NPR source for the region. I've been here for about a year now. And when I was discussing this job, people were asking me their impressions of KHSU, and I thought, well, it's very much a last century public radio station. I got all these funny looks. And I said, no, I really mean that in a good thing, because back in the 60s and 70s, when public radio and non-commercial radio was evolving, the formats were more free form. There were lots of different kinds of programs. It was more block oriented. Wasn't as formatted throughout the day as it tends to be now, and it allowed for a lot of exciting radio moments. You could have creativity. You weren't constrained by the dictates of a precise format. And as I said, it was a lot of fun to listen to. So I said it was a last century station in a good way, and I had to qualify that for people because I was getting a lot of funny looks. But now when people ask me what's the format of your station, I said, well, we'll pick one, because we still have a wide variety of programming. We are NPR, we run BBC, PRI, and at this point some American public media programs. But most of what we do is volunteer driven. Most of our music announcers are volunteers. Some of them are live in the studio. We pre-record a lot, and so my 6 o'clock on Sunday morning person doesn't have to be there at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning. So we have flexibility to time shift programming to better meet the lives and the lifestyles of our volunteers. But as I said, we do use a lot of volunteer music programmers. We have 5 different classical hosts. We have 5 different jazz hosts. We have a lot of folk music hosts. I don't want to say rock, but various types of contemporary music are heard on KHSU. So there are volunteer opportunities to work on our station. The problem is we have so many volunteer hosts, and they've been there for a long time, and they're very, very consistent and very, very reliable. So there's not always an availability for a new programmer to come on and have a regular program. However, we do have need for new material. If people have an idea for a show, we can usually accommodate a special program or a one-time only program to fill a particular need. If it's a program that fits a particular genre that we're already having on the air, it could be used as a fill-in program for one of the regular hosts. So, we encourage that kind of involvement and opportunity. In terms of training, we are part of Humboldt State University. There are some courses that are directly tied in with KHSU. We have the journalism school and KRFH, the student station, where a lot of people just learn the technology and build their on-air skills. And then often they evolve over to KHSU, where we have a course called the KHSU Experience, which is in effect an internship. And it allows people to work at a higher level in their college career to break into KHSU and do things for our station. But at the same time, we have those same opportunities for community volunteers. And when we do our training for the students every semester, occasionally we'll have community volunteers coming in as well and doing the same kind of training and contributing to the station the same way the student interns would contribute. So we would like to do more news. From what I understand, there was an arrangement before I got here called the Seven Rivers Radio Network, which I guess was a CPB-funded collaboration among the various public radio stations in the region. I don't know why it disappeared, but it sounded like a good idea to me. That would be something I think we'd be interested in talking about resurrecting. I've got experience in coordinating statewide news services and statewide programming services from my previous position when I was in North Carolina. It can be done regularly, and it can be done successfully. My sense is we're not competitive here. I think we're all here for public service, including KHUM and what Patrick does with his commercial stations. We coordinate and share a lot with his stations as well. So we're here to serve the public. And there's a lot of things we can do together by pooling our resources. If there's something important going down in South Humboldt, it's no reason why we shouldn't have it on the air and on KHSU and let people in Northern Humboldt and Del Norte County know about it also. We have a satellite studio up in Crescent City. We call it the Crescent City News Bureau. It's all volunteers up there. They produce a weekly news roundup for us. They also produce a weekly feature called School Days, which is about activities and developments in education, not just in the Del Norte County schools, but in the field of education. And we get that from our Crescent City Bureau. We're about to enter into a partnership with the Del Norte County Unified School District to move our studio onto their property. And that will open up opportunities to work more with Del Norte County school students as well as College of the Redwood students up there in Del Norte County. So we're excited about that partnership, but that's the kind of collaboration that could probably take place anywhere within our coverage area. And we're interested in having the conversations with you who might be interested in producing, as well as representatives from other stations who might be interested in working on collaborations.
So again, I'm Simon Fresh. I'm the technical director at KMUD, and KMUD didn't have a news department early on, and the station manager at the time said, well, there's no money. And so we had some volunteers. Didn't really work out well for, when did Estelle come on and sort of really pushed? Probably 1990 or so. We started in 1987, so it was a few years without news, and that really, I think people started to take us more seriously when we actually had news, and we had real news, and people started to get really careful with how you do news. So you have, as many sides as you reasonably can. So I would encourage that, however small you start, to do some news. I think that's really valuable. And people will tell you, like Patrick says, people call you with news. The Seven Rivers Radio Network, we should have a discussion later on. Joseph was really involved with that. We really only produced one simulcast, I think, but it was a really challenging program. We had KZYX in Philo down in Mendocino County. We had KHSU, KID, KMUD, and KVMR. Yeah. In Chico, in Nevada City. And actually, it would be great. Our program director, Marianne Norzer, might want to come and talk a little bit about if we want to go back to how do people get on the air at KMUD. I mean, we have that problem. We only have 24 hours a day. And some people like me have been there for a long time. I've done a program for a really long time, pretty much since the beginning. It's the last few years it's been called Bureau, and it's sort of a magazine with news and music from Europe, and I have a co-host, and we get really silly. And he's Canadian, I'm Swiss, and so what else did I want to talk about? So KMUD, we have 4 transmitters. We have one here in Eureka. It operates as a repeater. It just repeats everything we do down there. We have one in west of Laytonville on Cotto Peak. The newest one is in Shelter Cove. It's a translator, a 200-watt translator. that after many years we were able to bring there. It took some machinations with the FCC to get that done. And our main transmitter up on Pratt Mountain east of Garberville. And we just, our board of directors just agreed to a grant that will upgrade 2 transmitters. The one here up to much higher power and go with HD, which may or may not be the way of the future, but it was our maybe our last chance to get some federal funding to upgrade equipment, and it's from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and that grant is much less competitive than PTFP grants, which is Public Telecommunications Facilities Program. Those are kind of hard, and that's why we opted to go with this grant. And we'll also upgrade KMED, our main station, to HD, and then hopefully we can get KLAI in Laytonville upgraded also. CPB didn't want to do it the way we wanted to do it. As a translator, they said, no, we can't fund that. You have to do it as a full power station. Legally, by FCC rules, we could do it. So we'll have to figure out, do we want to spend a whole lot of money just because CPB says we have to do it their way? Or do we want to spend a little less money, but everything, we'd have to pay for everything. So that we'll have to determine that.
And Simon, is it true from a volunteering standpoint that after we have an HD channel that actually provides more opportunities for community?
So HD can have then HD2. It's similar to Key TV having currently 3 channels on basically the same bandwidth. HD2, we're planning to do HD2. We haven't really had the discussion what's going to go on there. Could be anything, as long as people don't say fuck on the radio. It could even be, this may or may not happen, but you could even let another broadcast organization use that bandwidth. So for instance, we could have Radio Bilingue, Latino programming, which they might be interested. I haven't asked, but I work with them, take care of another radio station that we share an antenna with down in Laytonville. We share, and I take care of it, make sure it stays on the air.
Can you use the channel for income?
I think we could, as long as it's non-commercial. I don't think it could be a commercial station. Speaking of volunteers, right? So I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody with an HD radio. No. There's somebody else. There's one more, because Jefferson Public Radio broadcasts in HD, and they have 2 signals in this area. Well, the engineer there tells me, well, there's at least one in Fortuna. He calls me when it doesn't work. So yes, it's a chicken and an egg situation. It's really interesting. However, radios have come down to about $50 for a portable and $100 for a little tabletop radio. We'll see what happens. But speaking of volunteers, I started early on with website. I think I was the first one that came out that had an email account, and I just totally got in. I'm kind of a geek. I got into it. And so we started doing a website, and we have a website committee. It would be great to have some volunteers who know more than I do to help me do stuff, because I just don't have enough time. There's not enough rainy days anymore. That I can just sit for several hours until I figure out, how do you do this in Joomla? Volunteer opportunities, there's many. We've not always been great at directing the volunteers and keeping them, but we're learning. I think we're making an effort to do that. I think that's it.
Well, I think the whole KMA is amazing. Like, I used to volunteer there, and we started out, I mean, you're talking about your translators. That was what the main station was, 200 watts mono, when I started, you know, back in the cabins or whatever. And to be talking about all these translators. Yeah, and talking about, you know, having all these translators that are now 200 watts and, you know, talking about HD, it's amazing. Pretty awesome. Anyways, so pirate radio, we're transmitting about 90 watts right now. We're pretty excited because that's almost double. And we're transmitting all of Arcata Bay, basically, Samoa, Manila. It's good. Doesn't really get into McKinleyville too good. You know, it kind of depends on weather. And it also gets into Eureka about, I don't know, it depends on the day. But we're an all-volunteer, consensus-based organization, which means everything's a pain in the ass. And we do fundraising a couple of days a week. We have live music shows we put on, and we get money from that. And we do a little bit of community outreach, like we do Skillshare stuff. We have a second transmitter that's really small. It's about 30 watts that we set up like at the Anarchist Book Fair and stuff like that for just kind of outreach purposes. And that's how we also meet people who want to volunteer with us. And our volunteers, we interview them, everyone together interview, and we ask them, like, why aren't you on KMUD or, you know, KRFH or one of these other stations, you know, I mean, because, you know, we ask them, what kind of show do you want to do? And they're like, I want to play punk rock, you know, or whatever. And we're like, well, you can kind of do that anywhere, really. And we also tell them, like, you know, the show, your program is kind of the smallest part, like, you know, the organizational part of this, and understanding that basically pirate radio, it doesn't really matter kind of what our programming is, because what we're trying to really do is a direct action that we're going to have this radio be on. Someone's going to be there. We don't let people put on iPods or anything. You got to be there and wait to get busted, basically. and it happens. It's happened to us 3 times. And we did actually have, before this last bust, we had news. We were just getting podcasts, though, because we don't have, people all have, you know, school and jobs and all that stuff, so we don't have any paid people. So we find like good, you know, kind of, we all agreed on a couple podcasts. I can't remember what they were, but they're like weekly radio shows, and we had news every day for 2 hours, but then we had to move, and the schedule got all changed, and we actually lost some people because in Arcata we get a lot of college students and stuff, and they leave after a while, or, you know. But there's a core group of people, and we just kind of try to let the new people know that we don't care about your show so much, but it's like, and you have to, you know, the consensus, you know, partaking in the consensus aspects of it, and realizing that what you're doing is illegal, and, you know, and you know, we have to train them, like, what do you do when you get a knock at the door, you know, and we've had some pretty fun knocks at the door. Yeah. Yeah. So anyways, and we're always looking for more volunteers, and as long as all these radio folks are here, if you hear FCC's in town, you could let us know. And Charles, you got to put the black bar over my face. Thank you. All right. Yeah, you got it.
Can I add a couple of really important things? One is that when we started, we really didn't want to tread on the toes of any of the other stations, either commercial or non-commercial, and everyone, absolutely everyone, every station in this community welcomed us open-armed, and they have supported us all. We've met with Simon and some of the people down at KMUD to get some idea on, because we didn't know anything, nothing. We've got some good volunteers now, but at the beginning we really didn't. And all the commercial stations support us when we have our event days. We are not funded. We just have a couple events at Blue Ox Historic Park. And so I think it's really, really exciting that the community has been as supportive. It's meant a lot. I still have all the notes that Joseph gave me about how to do interviews and stuff. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that we have 3 really important volunteers at our station. David Giarrusso I hope I said it right, Charles Douglas and Michael LeKay, who have been doing programming both for Humboldt Access and for our radio station. And we're really excited about different types of collaborations, both with Humboldt Access and with some of the other stations. So I think there's a lot of new things that can be developed, and I'm really excited about how, as a community, we can work together and serve our community, because as Gavin was saying earlier, you have to have an educated, knowledgeable population in order to elect people that make the rules. It's all interwoven, and that's why what we do, all of us, is so important. So that's all.
I have a question about the pirate radio. When they busted you, did they take your equipment, or they just slap your hands and say go away?
Well, the last time it happened, some suits came to the door, and people host us. We don't have a van or anything. And the particular house that we were at, the guys knew about it, and they saw these suits at the door, and they knew. Sorry, suits came to the door, and so this guy knew. And
wearing suits?
They were actually wearing suits. And the guy who wasn't involved with the station, but he was one of the guys that lived at this house, just totally gave him the like, hey man, like that whole. They just left a card and they said it would, be in your best interest to not be transmitting it anymore. And so we move, and every time you move, even if it's next door, it's an entirely new investigation, and they can't just follow you around, and they also have to have a reason. The people that were complaining about us called the sheriff several times. The sheriff said, "It's not our jurisdiction. We don't care," And even the guys at the FCC were like, they have to, but they were like, "Come on, dude, really?" Like they weren't excited about it, But no, they don't take your gear unless you persist, and we just move. At the same site, and we've considered some things that I won't. Some little tactics for that too that maybe I shouldn't describe on camera, but to persist, because it's good when we get in the journal and there's a paper and it's written up, and it's so there's things like that. But what was the question? Oh, I wanted to say too about if you want to, we do have a website, Humboldt Free Radio Alliance, hfra.org, I think, and it was Facebook, and then Monday nights and Saturday nights at the Alibi or fundraiser shows every week.
Cool.
Yeah. And,
Do you have a consensus meeting at the Alibi?
No, we actually have meetings at an undisclosed location. But actually, we are. If you know folks that might be interested in this kind of thing, we are actually looking to diversify. It's kind of a lot of dudes right now. We've got a couple of women. We had a couple leave actually recently, just relocating and stuff, and we'd like to have a little more of a real representation of the community.
Yeah, radio is kind of a bunch of dudes right now.
It's pretty sausagey.
Yeah, somebody said sausage factory earlier.
Yeah.
That was cute.
That's a fundamental problem with the industry, and one of the things I've seen from doing some reading about the problem of lack of multiculturalism in NPR, which I was writing about for Radio Survivor, was that people say in terms of the hiring. Of course, right now we're more seeing firing than hiring, but one of the problems is that it becomes sort of like an insular community. So one of the ways that KMUD has been able to show that you can have a lot of women on the air is because you have a community where that then builds on itself, right? So that's it's a really kind of scary thing. I worked in commercial radio for 3 years, and the only women in management at the station where I worked over that time I was there and since have been in the promotions department. Nothing to do with content. And it's 2011. Like, everybody in this room knows that we need some women to be producing some content for our radios. So it's like, and plus most of you listen to KMUD, so you know that too. But so anyway, I just think I want to make sure you're not being self-deprecating, because that's a struggle.
Yeah, this is our last meeting. It was like we actually had an interviewee who was a woman, and one of our other longtime participants is a woman, and she's like, "What do you think about being in this room with all these guys?" And she's like, "Oh, I have no problem with that." But it's kind of a thing. Like, once the organization is mostly men, and women see it from the outside, or whoever sees it from the outside is like, I don't look like I fit in there, you know, or whatever. And so actually for our last meeting, we decided as a group that the consensus thing is tough, I'll tell you, man, but it's good though. And that we're all gonna try to like find more people that aren't just like our dude buddies, you know, to participate.
I just wanted to mention that when I got recruited into pirate radio, I'm Emma, by the way, back in San Francisco, it was because I was a woman. They wanted more women. I mean, I was outspoken, but you know, it was, they were having the same problem then, and that was 98.
I don't think this. I mean, it sounds bad to say, but it's like we need, you know.
So currently at KMUD, there's actually a group of women putting together pieces for Women's History Month or Herstory Month in March, and 2-minute pieces, and I think they'd welcome anybody. I don't have a particular email address, but if you were to send it to marianne@kmud.org, I'm sure it would get there, or PD, like program director at kmud.org. And just, you know, I didn't coin this phrase, but this is Humboldt County, where the men are men and the women are too.
Short introduction. Katie Whiteside, the female program director of KHSU in the back.
I'm Mark with the Blue Ox Radio. I have a commercial question. This is totally off subject, but looking at the future, my future in radio, I'm thinking, can you actually make a living doing this? Can you give me a ballpark figure of what an annual income would be for your average DJ on the radio stations you work for? Just curious.
I guess, first of all, we have full-time people and we have part-time people. The part-time people, I kind of insisted on starting them at $10 an hour because I didn't feel like minimum wage was even fair. But I mean, a lot of those people are 2 hours a week, 4 hours a week. I mean, so they're very small. The people who are there full-time do other jobs. Nobody really can do full-time. I mean, they may do a 4-hour radio shift, but then they're also programming, they're also producing commercials, they're also updating websites, they're doing community events, and all that stuff gets involved in that. We have tried to make it a living wage for people. It's been a real struggle for us. I mean, there are actually, I believe, in terms of licensed stations in Humboldt County right now, 27 licensed radio stations. That doesn't even include you know, the certain translators that are just rebroadcasting out of the area signals. The commercial radio stations now, we're up to 18. We're the only ones that have anything more than just a morning DJ. Right. Most of them have a morning DJ and then they go satellite after that. You know, I'm trying to get everybody up to as close to $30,000 a year as I can do it. It's not, you know, as one of my guys says, the view of the bay is part of the pay. But you know, we're working at it, and it's a challenge. You know, because what happens with satellite radio on the commercial side is they cut the expenses, and then they can afford to cut the rates on the advertising. And you know, and one of the things too that happens in satellite radio is when they go to a satellite break, they got 4 minutes to fill, and they have to fill those 4 minutes. And so they will start discounting rates and say, well, you know, and the old expression, which is somewhat true around here, of $1 a holler. I mean, you know, I mean, there are people out there who will sell a commercial for $1. I mean, we really, you know, we can't make a living on that. We also don't have to run it, fortunately, because we're not structured. So if we don't sell the ad, you know, I mean, we have a max of 12 commercials per hour. That's our maximum that we will do. But if we don't sell one, we won't play it. We'll just go back in and play more music. But we're trying to really play, and so the other thing we have to compensate on doing is making really great commercials so that people will pay a premium. We also believe very strongly that we want people to listen through our commercials. So we've actually, we've won a couple of national awards for our commercials.
I hope so. You guys have hilarious commercials.
Well, I mean, we want people to listen to it, and we want people to respect it. And, one of the things I've had to explain to my DJs over and over again, I say, what percentage of our revenues comes from advertising? And they said, half of it? And I'm like, no, all of it. Those people are paying your salary, they're paying our electric bill, they're paying our copyright fees, they're paying our streaming cost, all that stuff. So love them.
I was going to add a little bit, just briefly to that. I worked for 3 years in commercial media, in commercial radio in Humboldt County, and what he's saying about you don't do one job is absolutely true. Our operations manager was also our program director, our news director, and what else did he do? I mean, he did a lot of stuff over there. And I was one of the lucky people to be full-time. And I was the only person in the production department. So I did all of the production, inputting all of the shows, everything. Plus I answered the phones, made coffee, did every other job in the station. And I will say that they did the best they could, but we are all making our living. And we were another station that didn't do a dollar a holler. Our premiums for our spots were a bit higher, and which was a bit of a problem because you were losing out on some advertisers that weren't looking at the quality of the programming or the quality of the spots, and we're just looking at, hey, I can get 50 spots on this station for $50 as opposed to 5 or 10 spots. And so they did the best they could to pay me. We weren't quite making as much as you're saying you want to pay, and I did have a second job. But I would say if you love it, to really just keep on doing it and keep trying. I really wouldn't want to discourage you from doing it because, yeah, I really think you should just keep trying.
I have a question for you folks. I'm Dave Giarrusso. I'm a DJ at Blue Ox, and I also am a volunteer at Access Humboldt. I do a lot of pre-produced stuff on my laptop, and I was just wondering, any folks, do you have like drop boxes where you would like take any kind of submitted pre-produced programming that you might consider airing, or is that something that's new to some of you, or most of you?
Station format.
Mm-hmm.
For our pirate radio, we are specifically community oriented, but it's all hard rock and metal. Specific format, hard rock, metal, and community service. So if it didn't fall into that kind of category, it wouldn't work for us. But you know what I mean, all these other opportunities.
Right. So are there like things on your websites that allow for like Dropboxing or MP3
In our case,
transference?
I would suggest you contact Katie, the program director, let her know what you have, and if she's interested, she would work out a way to get it.
Okay, thank you.
Just don't have an open inbox.
Great.
There's a website called You Send It, and you can put almost any size of WAV file or MP3 file onto that, and it's private box. You can get it, and it can be downloaded right there, into your whatever program you're using, and then.
Yeah, I'm currently using RapidShare, and I've been able to send my data to some of the engineers over at Blue Ox Radio to transfer over to our files. So I was just wondering if any of you guys had that kind of process going.
No, same with us. I think the best would probably be to contact our program director first. And I mean, it's kind of a great idea. It would be easy to set up, but then again, I mean, you're sending us something really great. Somebody has to make the decision, where do we put it? Now, occasionally a DJ can't make the show, so maybe that's a place where we could have a special. But really, it's a program director's decision there.
We have on our website, you have a way to contact us. I would say to send us an email. We have if you got a music show, we got a music director. And then if a program, send it to me. Then we have a FTP site on our website where you can download a full program, and we take it that way. So.
Thank you guys very much for.
Just one more thing. A few years ago, KMUD started the audio archive, where we have all the talk shows currently are there for 10 months for you to listen and or download. Music shows are currently there for 2 weeks. Some other programs are there for a varying amount of time. When it works beautifully. It usually doesn't work. When it doesn't work, it's usually the server's fault. Like yesterday, the archive just totally disappeared. It wasn't there. And I had to contact them and say, hey, I see you got a backup. You got to put that back now. And otherwise, it just runs and runs by itself, and it's extremely valuable. Listeners let me know, hey, there's a glitch, it doesn't work. And that tells me that they're listening to it, they're using it. So you can time shift it. It's like you can't listen to the news at 6 o'clock or at 8 o'clock in the morning. Download it at 4 a.m. and listen then.
Great. Thanks a lot, Simon, and thanks again to the panel. I guess from my point of view, I don't know, this feels historic that we've basically got all these stations represented here all together, and I really appreciate you all coming and spending the time, willing to put yourselves out for a community conversation like this. I think we're going to take a food break, and then we're going to reconvene really in 2 parts. The primary workshop is going to be Terry teaching community journalism, and the original goal there was, if you want to submit news stories to KMUD, this is your class. If other stations are open to receive your program, this is sort of that whole workshop is really designed to be your introduction to start being a reporter for KMUD. And it was set up for that. I think Harry's willing to make it more open-ended, so it's obviously, if Joseph is interested in airing it on Key Day, then he can do that, or Blue Ox, or KHSU. But separately, there will be more of a private conversation with the station managers. We want to get together and talk about developing program sharing tools and what can we do to support sort of the re-emergence of something like a regional program sharing method. And so we're asking, Jesse from our side has been inventing some shared sites and tools that we can use. So I invite all the station managers and your staff to come and sort of have, while we've got you here, we want to just have a quick conversation about what could we be doing to support more regional program sharing. Personally, I'm kind of bummed I can't listen to the Hoopa radio station over the air, but I'd love to hear a Hoopa radio report maybe shared on another station, but that's me. Also, I'm really into transmedia. That is, I'd love to have a radio station doing the simulcast commentary of the live Board of Supervisors meeting, so I can listen over here to people commenting, watching over here what's going on. I just think we got to have some fun with this, right? So anyway, so we've got more food. We're gonna, these folks are gonna be around so you can have follow-up conversations. We'll reconvene in, a half hour at 4 o'clock? So we'll reconvene at 4 o'clock for the workshop and for the other discussions. So don't go away, there's more.